Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor to bring a fellow poet, Dr. Deena Padayachee, from, is it Johannesburg, South Africa?
Durban, South Africa.
Durban. Okay, super. From Durban, South
Durban.
Africa. And he is a poet I've had the great honor to work with through our friends Prasanna Kumar at Fertile Brains. And I've seen him here and there across the poetic Zoomverse. And it is a great honor, sir, to have you with us today.
Thank you very much,
Well,
Richard.
sir, to help our fellow poets learn a little bit more about you, about the person of Dr. Deena, I have some questions for you. My first question is,
Okay.
what's some of the first literature, the first books that you remember as a child?
Okay. I grew up in apartheid South Africa. So literally everything we had to study from primary school to the end of secondary school was written by European people only. So the television, well, we didn't have television till 1975. And the newspapers were dominated by European thinking. The movies were dominated by European thinking, and so were the books in the library. So it was very rare to see anything written by anybody but a person of European origin. So we grew up with very strange values, attitudes. We were programmed by the apartheid system to behave in a certain way. So I attended a school.
So,
Okay, where was I?
so
Okay,
you
so
were
we were
you were
talking about
explaining,
the way I was growing up and the
yeah.
books that I was influenced by. So I was greatly influenced by the books of European origin that were prescribed for us from primary school right through to high school. And we did books like The Ascent of Everest. Okay. South Africa's a hot subtropical climate in Durban, but we did a story written by Edmund Hillary, was the first person to ascend Everest with Tenzing Norgay. And, it was about snow, blizzards. It was about Rest Camp 1, Rest Camp 2, 3, 4, and how they managed to get to the top of the Everest. But we obviously couldn't really relate to what they were talking about.
Right.
We had never seen snow in our lives, you know. So, can you imagine what relevance this book had to us? But we were compelled to write exams on the book, and we had to study it, we had to do summaries and all kinds of things. So that's how we grew up. We grew up without realizing it, being brainwashed, indoctrinated with certain attitudes, um, modes of behavior, and that sort of thing. And I think it was more than subconscious. I think we were also taught a kind of self disrespect. So we couldn't sit on a bench, all right, in Durban. Because it was for Europeans only. So we couldn't enter a museum because it was for Europeans only. We couldn't enter a library because it was for Europeans only. Couldn't enter a restaurant, Europeans only. There were signs all over the place. Okay, parks were for Europeans only. And then the beach, like I grew up in a place called Amshlali, um, which is about 50 kilometers from Durban. And in this area, which is quite close to the sea, we were not allowed on the beach because it was for Europeans only. There were signs saying Europeans only, no dogs allowed. So that's how I grew up. And at the library in Durban, it said the same thing. There were separate libraries for us and separate beaches in Durban for us, but most of the beaches near my home in Amshlali were for Europeans only. And where I grew up, there was a little tidal pool. So the water would come into the pool, and then when the tide receded, the water would go out. Now, that tidal pool had a chain across the path to it because it was a natural pool and it was at the beach. And they had a guard 24 hours, as far as I know, who stood there, and his job, African guard, was to stop people like himself and like me from actually going down that path into the pool. So swimming pools obviously were for Europeans only. So it obviously has a big effect on you growing up. And so the kind of books I read, one was the one author who made quite an impression was Ryder Haggard, and he wrote books like She and Aisha and King Solomon's Mines, and they were very exciting and very good books. And then there was um, Mark Twain. So we loved anything with Mark Twain. Samuel L. Clemens was terrific, Huckleberry Finn, and that sort of thing. We enjoyed it thoroughly, you know. But of course, there was a subliminal brainwashing that we, quite frankly, were unaware of. And there was a self disrespect for our own skins.
Sure.
And we didn't like the color of our skins.
Right.
We were always referred to in the negative, even though we were in the majority in the country. So and in high school, the only thing we could do in terms of professions was an accountant, a teacher, or a medical doctor. And even pharmacy was a problem because there was no school of pharmacy which was open to us at that time. Okay, so one of my uncles actually studied pharmacy in Ireland and came back as a pharmacist. And another uncle of mine went to to Ireland as well, the Royal College of Surgeons, and qualified as a medical doctor. He's still alive, and his son now is a doctor, but they've emigrated to Australia, and both of them are working as medical doctors in Australia. And in terms of other authors, as a young child, there was Enid Blyton, and uh, can't really remember any others, Richard. But they uh, as kids we thoroughly enjoyed them. My school library, I remember, was a small cupboard with about I think 100 or 150 books. And by the time I got to grade five, which in our time was standard three, I'd finished all the books. And there was no public library which I could attend. So my poor parents would buy books whenever we could. We were voracious readers, my brother and I, and we just read everything we could get our hands on. And one of the things we were forced to do is a hunt for books. Now, we never kept books in the lounge of our home because they would disappear. You had to hide your books away because, if your friends came along, you weren't there, the book would run away. So it was very difficult, and books were a treasured item to exchange. Okay. So what we would do is we'd have a book, and then they'd have a book, and then we'd exchange it, and then the book would be returned, and in that way you read more books. But one of the things I'll never forget was, I was told that there was a very nice book at a the home in the rural area where I lived. So I got on my bicycle. I went to this home, and there was a young girl there. And I must have been about 14 or 15. And so I get there and I spoke to her, a very pretty girl, a woman was probably about my age. And she smiled at me and all that. And then I asked for this book. And she didn't have a clue about what I was talking about. But the way she smiled at me and everything, after I left, I realized that she thought I'd come to see her.
Very interesting. Let me ask you, if you don't mind, another personal
Yeah,
question.
yeah,
In your home, in your
yeah.
family's home, was only English spoken, or was other languages also spoken?
Yeah, that's very interesting. One of the sad things that's happened to us is that Tamil is my ancestral tongue. And, you will only get to learn your mother tongue if your mother speaks it to you. Okay? So my grandfather would only allow Tamil in his home. That's my maternal grandfather.
Uh-huh.
So we actually didn't like to go to his home in Stanger because, he wouldn't allow us to talk English, you see. So we found that very difficult. We'd have to go outside the house because we were not fluent in Tamil because my mother never spoke Tamil to us most of the time. Okay, so I still have a smattering of Tamil, and they sent us to Tamil school to learn Tamil. But because we didn't have books written in Tamil, and we didn't like the movies which were in Tamil, and there were no newspapers in Tamil, we couldn't really practice it. And the irony is that the person who looked after me was were African people. So there would be an African helper, a gardener was male, and then there was the domestic helper, and they spoke Zulu to us. So up till today, I can speak Zulu. I practice Zulu all the time. But ask me to speak Tamil, and I have a problem, you know? And it's all about the mother. And I remember when I was about 16 or 17, at that time my grandfather relented, and he started speaking English to us. And he was a man who was multilingual, and so he was very steeped in his heritage and culture, and he was the person who gave me literally my first book written by a person who's melanin blessed, and that book was the autobiography of Gandhi. So he gave me that book, and then he started speaking English to me. And I complained to him that if mother doesn't speak Tamil to me, how am I going to learn the language? And that was actually very sad. I'll never forget how distressed he was. He knew about it already. I could see that he understood this. And you see, the way the European influence was, people felt that to be modern, you have to speak English. Okay. And that was very sad that, my mother bought into that sort of brainwashing. And, when I was a child, the ladies used to wear a sari. A lot of the married women would never be seen in anything but a sari. They never wore dresses, right? But as things developed over the decades, my mother stayed on with a sari and a gown, but the young people started switching to dresses, and now it's actually very rare to see a sari on the streets of Durban or anywhere actually. And the people are what I call a shade of European.
If you wouldn't mind me asking one more personal question, um,
Yeah.
do you have an idea of when your family came from the subcontinent to Africa?
Okay, the first Indians were brought over to South Africa in 1860 by the British government. They organized a system where Indians would be brought to work on the sugarcane fields in what was then Natal, the British province of Natal. So we were brought over for that purpose. Exactly when my family, mother's side, father's side, got to South Africa, I'm afraid I don't know. And so they came in, and that was their job. And after 5 years, they were allowed to return to India, or be given land in compensation, which was like 5 acres of land. And then they could settle on those 5 acres of land and cultivate it and do whatever they had to do to survive. So a lot of the Indians became market gardeners, and then they would take their produce to the market or go door to door among the European homes to sell their produce. But in my family's case, we had something similar, about 5 acres, but my father um, was also in this, fresh produce business, but he was forced to leave school when he was about 12 years old, when he was in standard four, which is grade six. So he left, he was forced to because of financial reasons, and there was no school nearby, you know. So they then got into my grandfather, my father's father, sent my father off to a little sugarcane factory. What would they call it? A sugarcane uh, producer. In other words, sugarcane would be brought to this factory, and then sugarcane would be produced at the factory. So he sent him there to learn carpentry and plumbing and that sort of thing. So my father gets over there. He had to cycle there and cycle back, and he learned all those things, right? And then he had a few brothers, so they all had this bright idea that they would now manufacture furniture.
Ah,
So they started making tables and chairs and boxes and that sort of thing. And then they had the bright idea that they would buy timber, logs. And then they started buying all these plantations. They would go to a plantation, usually owned by white people, and then pay a price for that. And then they would use a truck. They would have to cut the trees, put it onto the truck, and then bring it across to the sawmill. Now, there was no electricity at the sawmill. So what they did was they bought an diesel generator, which, according to my father, they used to break down quite often. And they had no water, so they sank a borrow for water. So I can still remember growing up, sometimes there would be like no electricity in the house, and then they would, use these oil lamps, and water. At times, the borrow would break down, and then my father built tanks of water. And then we would use those tanks. I can never really remember getting sick because of the water, but we survived, and then we set up an organization called Amshlali Sawmills. When I say we, it's actually my parents and
yeah, yeah.
his family, and they set up a hardware store, and they did sugarcane farming as well, and they got involved in fixing and repairing and maintaining the homes of the Europeans in nearby suburbs like Bellito and Salt Rock, and in that way. They were able to build up some kind of capital and
Yeah.
make some kind of living, and there was no school, so they donated the land to build a school. And then they got permission from government to build classrooms. And then the government came in to supply teachers. They were all Indian teachers and a principal. And but the curriculum obviously was decided by apartheid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wow, that's very interesting. Um, uh, Unfortunately, humans are so blinded by the foolishness of race. Uh, Even in my this country, uh, I
Yeah.
grew up in the north in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and they had,
Yes.
since the primary industry there were steel mills and factories related to that and railroads related to that, they were taking all comers. But as you might well imagine, there were strictly classes. If you were black, you got this kind of job. If you were Eastern European, you had this kind of job. If you were, shall we say, English, you got the top part of the jobs. And there wasn't full on segregation there, but it was very much culturally the thing. But I always
Yeah.
wondered from my childhood, why was it that there was such racism when the real problem wasn't African Americans versus Eastern Europeans versus the Irish versus the British, but the real problem was they were all being pushed down by the factories, by the ultra rich, and it just
Right.
seems strange. But then when I was a young man entering high school, we moved from Pennsylvania down to Florida, and in Florida there was still complete apartheid. There was still complete segregation. If you wanted to go on to Miami Beach, you couldn't if you were a black person unless you had a pass card that said you were working as a servant, as a cleaner, or as a service person in one of those big malls. And in fact, Jewish people were restricted as well. So, this stuff
Right.
was around. And in the late 60s, as I said, when I moved from Pittsburgh down to Florida, and there was still segregation, but in my high school year in 1968, the schools abandoned that segregation. It was partly Lyndon Johnson,
Wow.
and so suddenly there was integration, and it amazed me as a person with some humane values why suddenly busing,
Yeah.
which had been done for years, take the black children to a black school, take the white children to the white school, that had been going on for years and years and years. But suddenly busing became a problem when it meant that the neighborhood children, black and white and Hispanic, would all be coming to the same school. It was a very sad thing, and this was also during the Vietnam War era, and I was among the activists, intelligentsia, if you will, and we were protesting the war and we were protesting racism at the same time. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
there was a lot of friction, a lot of tension. Yeah, sir. So here
Yeah.
you are. Your family has achieved so much when you were still a young man, and they made schooling was made available to you. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, you said that's wonderful.
Yeah, I said, because your family was able to help you out and get you into a school so that you
Yes,
could study.
absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Now, obviously, as a young man who was studying for medicine, you did a lot of writing, you did a lot of studying. When when did you begin to feel the urge to write for your amusement, for entertainment?
Okay. That's actually quite interesting because in primary school, what would happen is we'd write what we called composition, like a kind of free writing. So because of all the reading I was doing, and we had these comics called Classics Illustrated. I don't know if you're familiar with them,
Oh
Richard.
yeah, oh
Classics
yeah.
Illustrated. So I amassed a huge collection, over 200 of them. And we
Wow.
had, you know, everything from Julius Caesar to Kidnapped, Robert Louis Stevenson, to Hamlet, to I think Davy Crockett, all kinds of fantastic stories in graphic form. Now, we had no television. So this was our television and our window to the world. Okay. What we didn't realize is that it was a window to a Euro-American world. You know, we knew virtually nothing about our own heritage. Now, my parents, my father only had a standard four. My mother didn't finish standard six when she was whipped out of school by her own parents, because that was the custom and the tradition at that time. So they knew, they didn't know enough about their own intellectual and cultural heritage. Okay. So what would happen is that because of that kind of background and the kind of reading I was doing, when they asked us to write compositions, I would have great fun. And then the teachers would actually read the compositions out to the class,
Ah,
which was a heck of encouragement to a little boy who's about 9 or 10, and be reading all the newspapers in sight. So, my general knowledge developed a great deal. The way we'd be taught is we'd be taught by teachers who teach us all the subjects. So they would teach us subjects like nature study and history and English and geography, the same teacher. And what he would do is he'd cover the board, a blackboard or a green board with white chalk writing, and we'd copy everything down. And then we'd be tested on it, in order to pass to the next standard. And corporal punishment and, quite frankly, assaults by teachers were fairly common. You know,
yeah.
we had to experience that, and I must say, in retrospect, it was quite difficult because some of the teachers obviously had psychological problems, but That was the way they were taught, and that's how we were taught. And yeah, it was. And then in high school, a similar thing happened. They would ask us to do free writing, and then I would be writing all kinds of things. And what would happen is we had very strict teachers who wouldn't give us very good marks on the essays and that sort of thing. But those teachers corrected our English. So we spelt wrong, grammar was bad, they would correct it. Unfortunately, nowadays, they have a system where many of the teachers feel they don't have to correct anything. So they don't correct the English, they don't correct the grammar, they don't correct the spelling. And when the young kids come out and they start writing things, it's actually quite sad. It's tragic, because for them to hold down jobs, to communicate effectively, it's actually very difficult for them. And most of the children don't go to private schools. So, they disadvantage from the word go. And in certain subjects in South Africa, in high school, you can do a 30%. You can get 30% in a subject and they'll pass you. So,
Wow.
yeah, exactly. It's very sad. And, it's actually very difficult when you talk to these young people because you don't want to embarrass them and hurt their feelings. And it's not their fault that the system is so bad. But
Yeah.
a lot of them, I must say, the young people are very intelligent, very able, and those who want to make a go of their lives will work very hard at it. But the formal schooling is very difficult. And I'll give you an example. We had a minister of communications who went to Geneva, and she went with her husband. So a reporter asked her on television, "So you went to Switzerland?" And she got very angry. She said, "I went to Geneva. I never went to Switzerland." And she just didn't have a clue. And this is a cabinet minister in our government a few years ago who actually said that. And she was quite a youthful lady, and very dynamic, highly intelligent, but her education had let her down. It wasn't her fault.
Right.
But the
Right.
poor woman was embarrassed, highly embarrassed. And I obviously think that the way to get our country out of its current turmoil, which is going to go on for a long time to come, is to sort out the education system. But somehow our government doesn't seem to understand this and doesn't focus on education because you educate people properly, it'll cut the crime rate down. It'll be good for the health of the people and all that. But somehow to get that across to the government has become very, very difficult.
And plus, it's expensive to do it right. And yeah. All right. Let me ask you
Actually,
this.
we pour millions into education. We really pour a lot of money. But the problem is the attitude of government to what's going on, the attitude of the teachers, and the attitude of the young people. So it's very difficult to discipline young people these days. We've gone to the other extreme, where, I'll give you an example. Um, um, some years ago, my book was prescribed for matrics. A book of prose was prescribed, short stories was prescribed for matrics. So at that time, I decided to offer bursaries to young people at schools around my medical center. And I said, as long as you excel, I'll pay your school fees. So three schools, and I asked uh, the educationists to choose the three young people. So the three young people were chosen, and then they had towards the end of the year, they had before they wrote their metric exams, they had a little function, and I sort of kind of ceremony handed over the funds to the schools, actually to the young people who then would have to pay to the schools. Oh, I'm not sure now. Actually, I think it was directly to the schools. Anyway, I had to give a little talk. So I kind of emphasized, some of the values that we had as young people and that were emphasized to us by our own teachers. And I said, please study very hard and do your very best. And, I can't remember this happening when I was in school myself, that young people would actually commit suicide if they didn't pass matric. But the inspector for schools uh, uh, came in immediately and said, Dr. Padayachee, they must just do what they can. No pressure on. Great. So what they did was they told me that we shouldn't put pressure on these young people because they might commit suicide if they don't do well, you know? And I am totally against that sort of attitude. I'm not
Yeah.
asking young people to do more than they can, but you always have to draw on something within yourself to give your very best. You can just sort of cruise through life just doing just being mediocre, and
Hmm.
then you'll envy and hate and fight with everybody else who's done better than you, which is very sad, and unfortunately, a lot of that happens in South Africa. And the people who excel are often attacked by the people who haven't bothered to study.
Yeah.
So, and that was, quite an eye opener for me, that young people would actually try to commit suicide if they, failed at school, which I really don't see why anybody has to do that.
Okay. Next question. Um, when did you begin to share your creative writing?
Okay, I obviously was admitted to medical school, so there was no time for creative writing.
No, no time
But
then.
Yeah, but what was happening was that there were a whole lot of books that were banned back then, by books written by South African authors and people like Malcolm X, who I'd never heard of till I got to medical school, and Martin Luther King as well. So, at medical school, we started reading. Besides our medical textbooks, we were now reading South African authors who were banned. In other words, they would be banned, their writing would be banned. Okay, people like Wally Serote and Ahmed Isip, and obviously Mandela, and others, they couldn't be quoted. Their photographs were not allowed. Like Mandela's photograph, picture, I never saw till he was released, about the time he was released in 1990. So, but we read these people, even somehow these books circulated among us at medical school. So we read these people, and that helped to foist an interest in what I call liberation writing. Okay, so I also had an uncle, a teacher, who was absolutely talented as a writer. So he wrote plays, he wrote short stories, essays, and that sort of thing. And he was very versatile as a writer. So after I qualified as a doctor, he invited me to a meeting of the South African Writers Circle in Durban, which I'd never heard of. I was working as a family doctor at that time. And then he said, "Look, I'm the only person of color in this group. Will you please come with me? Because I know you like reading and writing and all that." So he would come from Stanger, which was over 50 miles away, and the meetings would be in the evening around 7 in the night. And he would come, and then we would go together to the meeting. And that's where I started developing an interest in writing, as a professional thing to do. And then I joined the South African Writers Circle, which was 99% white, and I made lifelong friends among the Indians who were members. The whites, not so much. But what would happen is I'd enter these competitions, and the way you enter the competitions, short stories, poetry, and all that, is you did it anonymously, you know? So they didn't know who the heck was writing this stuff. And so I started winning prizes and getting, awards and that sort of thing. And then that obviously kindled an interest in writing. And then I sent a short story to what was then called the Grahamstown Eisteddfod. It was where you sent short stories. And I got the shock of my life when I got a prize. It was a prize for original writing. So, while I mean, everybody writes all the time, I suddenly found that I could get written, I could write, I could get published, and I would write letters to the editor of the newspapers. And we were a bit naive back then, quite frankly. You know, you felt so strongly about apartheid that when the government was doing silly things, and so was the local government, I would write about it, and write to the newspapers, and then they would publish these letters. And I had one experience which I think you'd find very interesting. What happened was I would bang away on my typewriter in the 1980s. Okay, there I am sending letters to the paper. And then I got a phone call from I think he was sub-editor or something, deputy editor. His name was Roy Rudden. He phones me up at my surgery. I don't know how he tracked me down because what I would do, because of the special branch, the apartheid police, I wouldn't write under my own name.
No, of course not.
So- And then I would give a false address. So what Roy Rudden discovered was it was the same typewriter. And the
Wow.
newspaper was the Daily News. So he phones me up. He says, Dr. Padayachee, somebody's using your typewriter. We're getting a string of letters from somebody who's using your typewriter. But there's
Must have been
always
Mark
different.
Twain.
And they're always using different names, but it's definitely the same typewriter. I actually got very frightened
Of
because at
course.
that time we had detention without trial. So if they felt that you were opposing apartheid, they had the right, the special branch, to come to your home at any time, 3 in the morning. They'd come to your surgery while you're seeing two patients and simply take you away and interrogate you. And the African National Congress back then was a banned organization. So they were not allowed to organize or get people to vote for. In fact, you couldn't vote for them because we were legally disenfranchised. So the only people who could vote in apartheid South Africa were European people of European origin, right? So there I was. I mean, I was fully occupied with medicine and looking after sick people. And the way we worked back then as Indian doctors was we were literally on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. People would pitch up at your home at midnight and say, please help us. And we had to. Or they'd phone you and say, look, my baby's very sick. I don't have a car. Can you come out? And it would be 2:30 in the morning. And I went out and treated these children and people at that time, midnight and all that sort of thing. And, uh, with all the stress of that, and often the patients didn't pay you, we had something called a private medical aid system. And often there'd be a lot of fraud. So people would come with medical aid cards that didn't belong to them, or else the card had expired, the company has gone bankrupt, but they carry on using the card. So you, in good faith, would go ahead, treat and everything, but you never got paid. So it kind of just carried on in that way.
So difficult. It must
So
have been so difficult.
yeah, it was horrendous. It was really difficult, and then you'd have all this happening. So what happened was, in terms of writing, I found that even the story that won the prize from the Grahamstown Ice couldn't be published locally. So I was very frustrated. There were magazines that would, I would always write under my own name.
Hold on one second.
So,
I got to ask. I have to ask one question, sir. You
right,
stopped talking about when that editor tracked you down. What
yeah,
happened after he tracked you down?
okay, I had to stop writing to the newspaper. So, and I would write to the Indian newspapers. There were newspapers targeted at Indians, and they literally published everything I wrote, completely unedited. And that for me was a great fillip. It made me feel good that I could write English that was publishable, that they didn't have to straighten out my grammar or anything else. And they were happy to publish it. But of course, you didn't realize, I mean, there were, over 40 million people in South Africa, that they would start bothering about letters to the editor. But I had a patient, a policeman, senior Indian policeman, and he told me that literally every single person of color who had gone to university was on a sort of watch list.
Wow.
And if you now wrote to the newspaper, you were under surveillance, even if it just meant watching everything you wrote. because just about everybody of my color would write, criticizing apartheid. That was the normal thing. So the fact that they would hone in on you and then target you and make you an object of harassment and torment was something that I didn't really realize in the beginning. So, and the Indian newspapers were under greater surveillance, I think, than the European-owned newspapers, because, and the African newspapers also. And what I learned many years later, after reading a book called Inside Boss, Inside the Bureau of State Security, which was an apartheid body, that actually the easy way to keep surveillance of us was to actually to actually have journalists be the spies for apartheid. So, and we've actually had newspaper editors who, were outed as spies for apartheid. So
Right?
journalists would come and interview you as part of their job. And according to this Gordon Winter, who wrote this book, what would happen is one report would go to the newspaper, but the bigger article would go to the special branch. And then depending, and obviously being a doctor, you had some influence in the community. And if you were outspoken against apartheid and went to the extent of writing against apartheid, you were obviously an enemy of the regime.
You
And
must
they
have been
used,
terribly concerned for your family too.
yeah, I wasn't married at that time.
Oh, okay.
But it was still very, very difficult. And so anyway, I was told by Kathy Harden of the South African Writers Circle, who was an absolute gem, and that there's a newspaper, at least a short story journal in New York called Short Story International. So it was Patricia Johnston and Kathy Harden. These were the two ladies, senior ladies at the South African Writers Circle, who, had a bit of empathy for my writing and, tried to encourage me, tried to nurture my writing. And they were fabulous, absolutely fabulous. And so they got me the address of the Short Story International. So I sent off the story that had won a prize from the Grahamstown Ice Titford, and it became the very first story that ever got published internationally, by Short Story International. And the editor was a lady called Sylvia Tankel, you know, and she actually paid me $25 for this
Excellent.
short story, which at
Excellent.
that time was a huge amount. And we were absolutely, the whole family celebrated and everything. And so I started churning out short stories for Short Story International. There was another magazine in Canada called Mother Tongue, Mothertongue. And they published one of my short stories. So it went on like that. But gradually, some of my work started being taken for anthologies in South Africa. As apartheid's stranglehold began to weaken, my short stories started getting published in South Africa. Not so much poetry, but I decided to self publish poetry in 1986. So I accumulated a collection of poems, and I also do aphorisms, quotations. So I wrote quotations, and then the way I did it was I titled the book "A Voice from the Cauldron." This title was suggested by a European lady, a Jewish lady called Ross Sarkon, who ran the Durban International Film Festival. So when I showed her some of the poems, she suggested my title originally was something from the Cauldron, and she said, "Why not make it a voice?" So that's how it got that title, and so it was one poem on one side and then a quotation on the other side. And at that time, you simply took your manuscript to a printer, and then a lady had to transcribe what I had written onto a page, and then the whole book would be compiled. And the thing that was so frustrating for me was she'd do the whole book, and then she'd give it to me, and then I'd find typing mistakes, and then I'd bring it back, and it went on. Before I went to the surgery, I'd have to go to her, And then she showed me all her typing mistakes, and then I'd have to show it to her where all her mistakes are. And then I asked her, after getting frustrated, going there about 6 times, I asked her, don't you check your typing? She looked at me and she said, this was an Indian girl, and she said, I'm very busy, I don't have time to check my typing. So she somehow she had no idea about the value of what she was typing. The printer himself liked what I was writing, but he was battling with her as well. And she was simply a product of the South African education system, even in 1986, And she was just not being meticulous and, and careful with what she was typing. And she was just quite happy to fill the day with mistakes, and it didn't matter to her, even though she was working for a printer. So anyway, that book got published. I printed only 1,000 copies. One of those copies I posted to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And many years later, when I got to Washington, D.C., I think it was around 1988, I went to a Rotary convention, which was being held in Pittsburgh. And then from there, I went to Washington, and then my wife met me in New York. And actually, we met in New York. At that time, she wasn't yet my wife, more like a fiance in 1988. And then we went across to Washington and went to the Library of Congress. And then I very boldly asked the librarian, so do you have this book, A Voice from the Cauldron by Deena Padayachee? And he looked at me and he showed me the catalog. And by then, I think it was on computer. So he showed me how the book was actually there. And I don't know if any of my other books are there, but for me, it was a great, great thrill
Oh my
to see
goodness,
that my
yes.
book was. Yeah. And what happened in 1988 was that the book in which my short story had appeared, Short Story International, and then Sylvia Tankel and her husband, Sam, invited us to supper. So, really nice restaurant. And it was different from South Africa in some ways, but it was fantastic. And, at that time, I think it was still illegal for people like my wife and I to actually enter a restaurant that served Europeans. And there we were having supper. And I can still remember, the what I ordered was a fish dish. I love fish, but I ordered the wrong fish dish. It was swordfish. It didn't have any kind of taste at all. Yeah, but Sylvia and Sam were fantastic. Really nice.
Well, that's wonderful. My goodness.
Yeah,
You being a writer all by itself is 10 kinds of challenge. Being a writer with that kind of government oppression, that kind of racism, my brother, I have such respect for your
thank you.
talent, for your heart, for the depths of your soul, that you would struggle through all of that so that your voice could be heard.
Yeah.
Sir, it is a great honor for me to talk to you.
Thank you. And it's not just my voice because as you would know, Richard, you're a writer. We write because of what we detect among our people. I saw it among my patients. I saw what they were going through. So it wasn't, I was simply articulating their feelings, their challenges, their problems, and trying to get it out there as a kind of communication to the people with all the power, to get them to perhaps be a little bit more humane, you know? And
Yeah,
but when you did that, you were the messenger that they didn't like. So they would target the messenger instead of dealing with the problem. I'll tell
right.
you one of the things that happened was I was allocated an apartment actually in a place called Phoenix, which had it's an apartheid township for Indians only. So they said I could go there. And when I went on the highway to Phoenix, there was no road sign on the N2, which was the highway, to show where Phoenix was. So before I went out, I knew this would be the problem. Even with the southern, this was in the north, the southern township was a place called Chatsworth, but they had no sign to Chatsworth, which had, over 50,000 people, but they had a sign saying Chatsworth rubbish dump. That was the only sign to Chatsworth. So with Phoenix, I spoke to my friends, colleagues, family, and all that, and they told me there's no road sign. So this is approximately where you turn off. And there was a sign saying Mount Edgecombe, which is a white area, still is largely white, and Amshlanga Rocks, which was obviously strictly segregated for whites only. Amshlanga Rocks was on the seaside. So I knew that was the turn off. And if I turned off there, I would eventually get to Phoenix. So that was the kind of, behavior that we experienced at that time.
Okay, let me ask you a poetry question.
Right.
You mentioned that you decided to publish your poetry yourself. Uh,
Yes,
let me ask you a difficult question, but I feel I can always ask this of poets.
that's fine.
What is that special power of poetry? What makes it worthwhile? What makes it important?
Okay, poetry for me has been about very careful use of language. And my poetry is prosaic. So it's not, Wordsworth or Browning or any of those people. But what it did was, in a very prosaic way, communicate with people in a short space of time. So and especially nowadays with life being the way it is, people have less time to read a novel. Okay, and a novel of 300 or 400 pages can take months to finish sometimes for busy people.
Yeah,
But a poem can be read in a few minutes, and I try to leave a message with every poem, so that something and expressed in a way that's uh, simple, you know. You must have read George Orwell. Now, George Orwell didn't write poetry, but when you look at his first book, Burmese Days, it's highly complex language. One of the best books I've ever read in my life that I recommend to everybody. But the next book and the next book became very simple in language, like Animal Farm, even 1984. Not complicated language. So obviously he decided, I'm going to write for everybody, not just for the academics at the universities. So I like the fact that I can very carefully, and nowadays we have thesaurus. So I check on the exact meaning of a word, then I check on the emotion of a word, the flavor of a word, how it makes the reader feel when he reads that particular sentence written in that particular way, so that a kind of mood and tone is conveyed to the reader. And for me, that's the beauty of poetry. I don't like obtuse works. I don't like convoluted language. I don't like rarefied kinds of communication. It kind of turns me off. I switch off and go to sleep. But when I hear your poetry, for instance, and the poetry of some of the poets in Fertile Brains and other webinars, it's really exhilarating. And like at the to I think the only way poetry should actually be done is by sharing screens. So you have the poem there, because poetry demands a lot of concentration. If you really want to, appreciate a poem, you need to actually, get all the poets to learn how to share screens and put the poems up in the webinars. Thank you.
thank you. Okay, let me ask you this. There are multiple schools of thought, but I like to think of it as a continuum. There are poets who say you should write every day. You should practice your craft, whether you have an interesting idea, whether you have something that inspired you. But then the other side of it, the other extreme, is that you should only write when you get that inspiration, when you get that overwhelming idea that you just have to get down. So between writing every day for practice to writing only for inspiration, where are you in that spectrum, sir?
Okay, with my profession, working 7 days a week, I couldn't write every day. There would always be emergencies and problems and challenges and people phoning and all that going on all the time. So for my life, that really couldn't happen. I can tell you, there were times when I'd be driving to the surgery, and I'd get a thought, and I knew I would forget. So I'd pull off the road, and that time it was safe to pull off the road. Nowadays, it's actually dangerous because you might be hijacked. People from the side of the road might come and hold you up. But that time, I would actually do that, and write, scribble notes to myself, And look, you're a poet, so you know how it is. You could be having a shower and suddenly you have a thought.
Boom.
You could be and you need to stop and get this thought down. For me, even brushing my teeth can be a problem because suddenly something comes. And what I write very often are quotations nowadays. Um, um, let's see. I'm trying to think of one of the quotations that might gel with your audience, but this one might just be a bit provocative, but it's one of my favorites. Colonial curricula helps to create caricatures of the conquistadors. Okay, so some people don't like it, but it's the way I feel. It's the
I,
my kind of thinking,
I
and
think
it's
you're
been
absolutely right, sir. You're absolutely
yeah,
right.
it's been published and all that. So my dream is to have a book, with all my quotations. The way I thought it should be done is like a diary, and a diary without dates. So it would go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and a quotation at the bottom for each page. So you're not restricted by date, whether it's 21st or 22nd. You're not restricted by month. And then I could do that 12 months, but no month specified. So,
Very nice.
you would keep it as a notebook, but because what I find with quotations, if I put like 100 quotations that I've written in a book, then there'd be a problem because quotations are not that easy to take, just a book of 100 quotations. So rather you, like previously I interspersed it with poetry. So now I want to do that again. I want a book of poetry interspersed with quotations, but also, a book of quotations. And you'll find this very unusual. I mentioned to you how difficult it is for me to get published anymore. And you go to a publisher, you can self-publish, but often these publishers don't really have a feeling for what you're writing. So they don't have, it's just a commercial thing for them, And then once you've done that, the big problem is distribution because the bookshops are generally speaking owned by European people of European origin, and they have a great anathema to anything about apartheid or racism as it is today, and the struggles of the disadvantaged world to try to raise itself. They have really no interest in all that, and I'll give you a little example. I was actually on a cruise over New Year, and the comedian on the cruise, who was somebody I knew, asked me to be on a panel, to take part in a quiz. The other two people on the quiz were a lawyer, a white lawyer, and a husband who's a former rugby player. So the three of us were answering all these questions. We were up against another panel. And then one of the questions that the comedian decided to ask us, his name is Carvin Goldstone, and he was actually working on the ship, doing shows, and he's brilliant. So he asked the question, when did women first get the vote? So I knew the answer. It was New Zealand in 1893. And the lady lawyer was quite perplexed. And I find this very often in South Africa. when you know answers to various things, they kind of look at you in total surprise, you know? And it gives you, unfortunately, an idea of what they really think about you. You know, no matter what your profession, no matter that you've published books and been prescribed and all that, they can't get the South African Europeans very often can't get their heads around the fact that you're somebody who's done things they haven't done, you know, and know things that they haven't known. So after I gave the answer and all that, afterwards we were chatting, and then I looked at her, and she actually bought my book of short stories. So I looked at her and I asked her, I said, "Do you know why I know this answer?" So she said, "No, I don't, because I didn't know this answer." So she came across as a bit of a feminist. So you would think she would know it, you know? So I said, "It's very simple. For most of my life, I was disenfranchised. So naturally, I had an interest in when peoples of the world first got the franchise, whether it was India or England or America. When did various peoples first get the right to exercise their franchise? And when did women, especially, get the right to exercise their franchise?" So, at one point in my life, I actually drew up a big roster with everything, I knew it all at that time. But obviously, the first country to grant that franchise was something that very close to my heart. And the why I mention this is because she looked very, very pained when I mentioned that for most of my life I was disenfranchised. It's the kind of thing that people who had the benefits of apartheid like to shut out of their minds. And they like to feel that somehow we deserved apartheid. And they like to feel that they were fighting communism. And the Communist Party in South Africa is nowhere in terms of votes, in terms of seats in parliament. They just don't feature. So South Africa is really an anti-communist state in many ways. And yet that was the excuse they used to fight us getting the franchise.
I have to tell you this little story that's right along that kind of line. I too love history and read history
Okay.
more than any other thing
Yeah.
I ever read. And
True.
one day, as a young man, I was probably no more than 8 or 9. I was looking at my grandparents' mantle, and there's a picture of their wedding, right? And I
Yeah.
see this, and I realize that the costumes implied that they were getting married in the 1920s. And I had just been reading about women getting the vote in 1922. And so I turned to my grandmother, a wonderful, warm, caring person, an ideal grandmother. And I said, "Oh, grandmother, it must have been so amazing to be a young married woman and suddenly to be able to finally vote, to participate and to help your government decide." And she
Yeah.
looked at me. Now, this is a woman who's second generation in this country from Eastern Europe. And she said, "Oh, Ricky, I've never voted. I don't think I know enough." And I thought, oh my goodness, here's a woman who cares about her neighbors, always part of her community, always giving, always caring, part of her church. A really wonderful, loving, caring person. She spoke 6 languages. An
Mhm.
intelligent person, a sophisticated person. And I said to grandmother, what a shame you have never taken a chance when you think about all the idiots that are voting. One caring person would have been a wonderful thing. So I completely appreciate what you're talking about, sir. God, I have such respect for you. Let me
Yeah.
ask you one more question, then we'll
Thank
get to
you.
the poetry. If a young person asked you, is poetry important? Is poetry important enough for me to spend my life doing poetry, participating in poetry, being a poet? Is poetry worthwhile?
Yeah, poetry, in my view, is very beautiful. The good poetry is absolutely gorgeous. but it's not for everybody. Not everybody would want to read a novel or a quotation or an essay or anything. So people do what they can do. And one of the things I wrote recently is we should never feel inferior to anyone because we all do what we can do. And so what some people can do, I'm paraphrasing, what some people can do, we can't do, right? So I'm not, for instance, I can't build a home. I can't fix a motor car, you know. So they've got that talent. They have absolutely no interest in poetry. So if they don't want to read poetry, that's fine, you know. But at school, I think they should be exposed a little to poetry, but it has to be outstanding poetry that won't turn them off poetry for good. And it's one of the problems I have with like Shakespeare. Shakespeare writes beautifully, and I love Shakespeare. But when I studied Shakespeare, we had to do Shakespeare for 3 years at school. And I was like 14, 15, and 16, the final 3 years of my high school. And I was too young for Shakespeare. I was just not mature enough to appreciate him. At the moment, I've got the collected works of Shakespeare in my library, you know. I don't look at it as often as I should, but, every time I come across a Shakespeare quotation or I read some of his work, I love it. I enjoy it, but I believe Shakespeare is something that you don't just listen to, but you read and then you reread and you savor it and you enjoy it. So, in terms of devoting your life to poetry, that's a difficult one. That's for very, very few people, I think. And to be writing only poetry, that again, I think is very, very difficult. And poetry, I think, will always have a very minute audience among the peoples of the world. But if you take 7 billion people and you take the way we can disseminate our poetry now through Amazon and all that sort of thing, you're going to get millions of people actually who would love to read what you've written if they know that it exists.
One of the things that I typically will say, I think in defense of poetry, is they
Yeah,
use it in football. They use it in sports to chant. They do their cheers. That's all poetry. Music, lyrics
right.
are poetry. And also, and I say this for its own particular peculiar reason. They use chanting in the
Yeah.
military. There are all kinds of war chants and soldier chants.
Yes,
If this
yes, yes,
stuff didn't
yes.
work, they wouldn't use it. You hear it in advertising all the
Right.
time. So I argue that poetry is very important, but you're right. It's not for everyone. It's not for everyone's taste. But that's a wonderful point.
Yeah.
But I always feel that as a
Yeah.
poet, I have to defend it just a little bit. Ah, okay. One last question, then I'm going to have a
Can
chance to
I
hear one last question. Do you have a question for me?
Okay. I just have to comment, make a comment here. The fact that what you said is very relevant. The fact that songs, come from poetry. Okay. So you've got songs, you've got a whole lot of different things that come from poetry. Even a slogan can come from poetry.
Exactly.
The national anthems come from poetry. So there's a huge place for what I call popular poetry. The Indian movies are full of the most beautiful songs, and nowadays they come with subtitles. So when I watch an Indian film with subtitles, the most popular ones are in Hindi and Tamil and that sort of thing, and you sit there and you watch it and you listen to, and I find listening to these songs absolutely lovely, fabulous, fantastic, terrific. And when I look at the poetry, oh my God, you want to, write it down and remember it for the rest of your life. So, yeah, poetry will always have a place, but, for people who are fortunate enough to want to love it and listen to it and are actually touched by poetry. Now, as for a question that I want to ask of you, Okay, in the literary sense, I'm going to ask you, um, what sort of educational qualifications have you got in English literature?
Well, sir, I have, I really have three main influences in my literary background. My mom was very much a writer person. She wrote a lot of poetry. She had collections of the classics. So I got my teeth cut on that stuff. When I was just a child, probably no more than 7 or 8, I came across a copy of the Iliad. So I became absolutely
Oh,
infatuated
yes, I did.
with Homer's writing. So I read the Iliad, I read the Odyssey, and the
Right.
Aeneid, and the great classic literature, and that started a fire in me. I was so fortunate. There was a beautiful library in my hometown. It was built by one of the steel robber barons. Andrew Carnegie built these huge, beautiful libraries. And I, after reading every book in the child section, I kept sneaking into the adult section, and they would say, "No, no, 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 you can't. No, you can't take that." So I'd get my
Yes,
mother to take that book out for me. And then when I was in just in high school, I had the good
right.
fortune to have a wonderful literature teacher, and so I read so many wonderful books there that also kindled the fire with me. And in college, I focused more on the sciences. I got much more engaged with environmental science and media science. I was got trained as a microbiologist and a media person. So I sort of went away from that. But the other thing that was so much a driving force for me was having seen the various kinds of oppression in the working class town that I grew up. I read voraciously on social evolution, social revolution. Thomas Carlyle's book on the French Revolution. I read books about the robber
Mm.
barons in the U.S. I had a tremendous, wonderful European history uh, course that I took. Just really opened me up to European history. And because of the time I was growing up in, when I was in my rebellious teenage years, this was during the Vietnam War era. This was when Dr. King was was in the streets being beaten for simple humanity. When people were being beaten and dogs let loose on them for trying to order at a food counter. And so I started writing political work, social commentary, and in the big rallies or the anti-war rallies, I was writing and reading anti-war poetry. And when I got drafted, because this was the Vietnam War, they were taking everybody. I got drafted. I organized
Right.
when I was I told them when they asked, you have a right to my body. You do not have a right to my mind. My mind is my own. I believe in the Constitution. I have a right to free speech. I have a right to think and to write and to speak. And they decided that it would be the army would be better off without me. They actually, I was interviewed by the military
Ah,
police, and this a major in the military police said to me, because I had organized a group of soldiers and taught them meditation so they could calm down, because the whole purpose of that that initial intake was to terrify people and to scare them
yeah,
into submission. So I gave them the
yeah,
tools to calm down. And
yeah.
this, this major said to me, "You are a danger to the U.S. Army." And I said, "My friend, you flatter me."
Um,
So they said, for medical reasons, we're going to release you. We don't want you around here.
Wow.
So they said the
You're
only way we can do
fortunate.
that is we're going to put you in a psychiatric hospital because you're a danger. We don't want you around other soldiers. I was organizing soldiers and they didn't like that idea. So
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah.
spent a very interesting month in a mental hospital.
Wow. Imagine that, eh?
And at the end of my
Reminds me
my
of,
the military police interview, they sent me to see a psychiatrist to give me a final psych evaluation.
yeah.
And this gentleman is looking through. I literally gave them 4 hours of testimony. I talked about karma. I talked about the power of chanting. I talked about meditation. And they said, "Well, you must be on drugs." I said, "Yes, I'm on oxygen and nitrogen right now. It's amazing." And they said, "Well, where did you get oxygen and nitrogen?" I said, "Oh, you can get it anywhere."
That's hilarious.
And the
Oh
psychiatrist says
God.
to me, "Richard, I think you have better things to do than to waste your time killing people." And I said, "I couldn't agree more." And he said, "Well, my only option is to send you to the military barracks to stay in the officers' headquarters." He said, "Frankly, they'll kill you." He said, "But the only other option I have is to put you in the mental hospital. Is that okay?" And I pointed out the window at this military base and I said, "Well, if that's sanity, book my room."
Wow. Yeah.
So that was my
So how
that was
long did you
my
spend
military career.
in the hospital? Did you have to spend more time at the hospital?
I spent a month. A
Only a
month.
month. So after they discharged you, they just said unfit for combat.
Yep, yep, yep. I wouldn't make good soldier
Right.
material. I wouldn't go kill people on command. What the hell was wrong with me?
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, well
All right.
now the fun part. I get to turn to
Yes.
my friend, my brother, Dr. Deena, and say, "Sir, would you read us some of your poetry?"
Okay, this poem is called Ideals, and it's set in 19 well, I wrote it on the 5th of November 1983. If I could turn the Sahara to sugarcane and give some of it to the Jews and some to the Palestinians so they will not kill. If I could take the ice of Siberia and make it hum with life and give some of it to every landless person in the sad world so that no absent owner might steal a roof. If I could make a little of the Atlantic Catholics and to Irish Protestants, to Germans and to Dutch and to English, so that bomb will not lacerate child, and no vital, vigorous person will be paralyzed. If I could give a little bit of the Pacific to the Americans to fight in among themselves, so that they might stay away from Vietnam and Grenada and Cuba. If I could teach the Russians that they have more than enough land, and they do not need to invade Hungary or Czechoslovakia or Afghanistan. If I could teach man that there is no happiness in another person's unhappiness or life in another's death, if I could teach man not to strangle this earth with his progeny and annihilate other species, if I could teach man to be satisfied with God's bounty and not to steal, if I could teach man if I could teach man that religion cannot mean hate, and that arrogance is simply a symptom of decay and doom. If only, O Lord, if only. That's from my book, A Voice from the Cauldron.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Please read on, sir.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Okay,
it's
this
okay.
one is no, I didn't want to just go on, but this one is dedicated to our leaders during apartheid, who were unbelievably brave. I mean, back then it was unbelievable. And even now, when some of them oppose the government in power, they're incredibly brave. So it's called Leader. You're so delicate. Your limbs are so thin. They can be broken so easily. You're so easy to torture. Your eyes that see what we'd rather not see. Your brain that is seared by the hell of thought. Your sensitive skin. Your genitals. All so vulnerable. So easy to hurt. Why do you still care? Why do you still speak out against evil and injustice? Why do you want to die? Don't you have a sense of responsibility? We love you so much. And we, your poor, old, uneducated, exploited, weak, defenseless, tortured, bullied, traumatized people, need you so much.
Beautiful, brother. Beautiful.
Um, I'm reading poems from that initial collection. The next one is called Somewhere Along the Line. Somewhere along the line, there develops a contempt, even a hate, a lack of responsibility for one's offspring, for children, for life. Somewhere along the way, the effervescent genius, the arrogant strength, the tumultuous seeking, exploring, turns to apathy, indifference, self-hatred, and weakness. Somewhere along the way, the conquering hero becomes a cultured woman, begging for conquest, spreading anemic thighs in a terrible desire for the union of strength and weakness, rude barbarity and insipid dignity, ignorance and knowledge, virility and passivity, as German conquered Roman, Aryan blended with Dravidian, Arab with Spaniard, Mongol with Russian, since time began. That was written in July 1983. And that poem was sparked by a book I read called Our Oriental Heritage by this American professor, Will Durant. And Richard, it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's quite a tome. I would say it's at least 600 pages, and he's written a number of books, about history. And it's I read somewhere that he was an advisor to the for the making of the movie Cleopatra. But
Ah,
his depth of insight, his maturity, his intelligence, and his openness of mind were very attractive to me, at that time. Um, I think what I should do now is go to more recent poems. And
those are lovely, by the way. Just beautiful poems.
thank you. Thank you. Right. A doctor's prayer. To be ethical in an all too often unethical world. To be honest in a world which is often dishonest. To be humane and civil in a world which is often inhuman and uncivilized, to be non-racist in a world that sometimes prides itself on being legally racist, to adhere to the highest moral standards in a world which sometimes condones immorality, to always behave with humility and kindness in a world full of arrogance and duplicity, to always act in the best interest of our patients and not in the best interest of one's bank overdraft, to never dishonor our colleagues and our noble profession, to try to live in a way that focuses on leaving behind happy memories. That is the daily challenge faced by every medical professional and every human being. May we always behave in a manner that does not bring opprobrium on ourselves, our families, our colleagues, our fellow human beings, and our country. May we never dishonor those who suffered so much to garner for us and our descendants our hard-won and blood-soaked freedom from legally imposed racism. Okay,
Bravo. Bravo,
thank
sir.
you. Okay, now let's go to a romantic poem called Love. which was written in honor of a lady I met after my divorce and who's one of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life. It's called Love. A writer is nothing without a hand. A thinker is nothing without a voice, without a pen. I am nothing without you. You are closer to me than my intima is to my artery. You are my elixir of empathy. You are my ink, my pen, my hand, my blood, my heart. You are the life in my eyes, the texture of my skin, the oxygen in my lungs, the sweetness on my tongue. You loved me more than I'd ever know. You made me come alive like rising golden light in the darkness of a surreal dawn. We made the night iridescent with our love, with the sultry softness of your mouth, your slim, sensuous, feminine fingers, your beautiful, loving voice. Your passion ignited my life. Your love made my steps lighter. Your love made possible this poem. This was written in August 2007.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Then the next one is called Oh, the Talons That Tear. Where are the arms that will love, the kisses that could nurture, the smiles that warm the heart, the embrace that will succor the soul? Then the next one goes like this. Despite every obstacle, despite every malicious eye, despite the demonization of our functional melanin, we will sing, we will rise, we will laugh, we will love, we will relish our lives, lives that come but once.
Bravo.
And then the next one is for a friend of mine called Rasul J. Sneeman. He unfortunately is passed away. He was a Muslim, but he was very idealistic, and he wanted more for our country. He wanted an end to corruption. He wanted more for the people in every way, the poor people especially. He wanted homes. He wanted food for them, and he wanted to care for them. He was an intellectual of outstanding stature. And he'd organize meetings and he'd invite me to them. And I would be terrified. Now, I'm talking the last 5 years, last six
Sure.
years. I would be terrified to go because I personally experienced so many problems in my life, so many challenges all the time that I feel the need not to provoke the harassment of the state. So anyway, uh, this poem for Rasul J. Sneeman. They've already come for you. You breathe with their ears inside your throat. You see with their eyes inside your skull. And still you liberate souls. Still you shatter shackles with that illuminated mind of yours, like an angel of love in a murky world of tycoons and corruptors. Your words still strike the savages in their entrails, and those in pain, those who are betrayed, those who love our country, those who are hungry, those who are homeless in the conqueror's paradise, those whose brains are ugly, tools of the drug pushers, all look at you for hope, for love, for kindness, for succor. May your tribe increase, O heavenly, wise oracle of our country. Yeah, and as I said, he's gone, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, Writers should be free. Free to think, free to write, free to feel. To see writers in yoke, their spirits in harness, the thoughts inside their heads censored. To see the writers manacled is perhaps one of the most horrifying things one could see. Woe, South Africa, when the state owns its writers, when writers censor themselves, when writers are afraid to think, when writers are seen by the state as enemies of the state, when the state unleashes its hoodlums upon its writers, then surely tragedy will dog such a state and its most disadvantaged. Then travail asphyxiates every breath.
Beautiful.
And the next one is called A Voice from the Cauldron. Um, it's the same name as my book volume of poetry, but this is a separate poem written many years later, decades later. We scamper from cage to cage like nervous, frightened birds, we South Africans, while the demonic predators who terrorize us are free. Free to torment us, to violate our families, to turn once hopeful, finally liberated citizens of apartheid-free South Africa into tension-filled, stressed out, scared prey, fearful prisoners in steel-ribbed cells. The brazen criminals are free, free to invade our nurturing homes, to raid our struggling shops, to hijack our vehicles, to turn distressed employers and worried workers into melancholy migrants. The gangsters are free, free to shatter our economy, free to attack the police in their ceaseless assault on our country. The ogres are free, free to prowl our shuttered, sinister streets, our desolate, dark city centers, our frenetic roads, like raptors while we cower in terror, wondering when our number will come up. When will we lose the war of deadly South African roulette? Richard, I just want to read that last few lines again. I made a
Please,
mistake. The
please.
ogres are free, free to prowl our shuttered, sinister streets, our desolate, dark city centers, our frenetic roads like raptors, while we cower in terror, wondering when our number will come up. When will we lose the war of deadly South African roulette?
Wow. Beautiful, sir.
Okay.
I would like to
Now,
share.
this one, yeah,
I was going to say, I have two I would love to share with you. Let me share this
yes.
one. Uh, I had I'd gotten a diagnosis that I needed an ablation. I'd had a stroke, and they said
Oh,
that I had a
wow.
valve problem, so they needed to go in and do valve repair on my heart. And
Yeah.
as you know, that's a in that surgery they have to stop the heart and restart it. And being a person that's thought once or twice about mortality, I was concerned that since they were going to do this ablation and reduce the sensitivity of my heart, would I still be the poet that I used to be? And mixing my metaphors. So I wrote this right after, literally right after my heart surgery, and I thought you, as a physician, might find it amusing.
Yes. Yes.
So this is called "In My Head and in My Hospital Bed." Still, I'm yet processing my recent nascent pale pastel palette parade through the labs and life in surgical masks, aghast in achingly new hospital halls, contending each sterile stall the viral spiraling path of life's laugh, wrestling patients across those looming dangerous gaps, past pale, deftly stated plates with fluids received, all in good grace. The hallway ceilings flying, fleeting past, upturned eyes and face searching each mask, appraise the passing stainless machines that beeping buzz and register their cargo traffic, life's smudge. Digital carts carrying heart vigil signals dart in tubes, flowing in arms as they dare buoy life aching, arcing joy amidst the carving robot knives, regaling in microscopic live detail the unfurling flight of fibrous life. Hearing my body's story played in real time across myriad mental sentinels, gleaming, shrieking screens of darling, data bearing scientific angels upholding their slip dripping bags like flags unfurled, tied like Ulysses past the fatal rocks shocks. Their chemical potions, potent and pure, luring stealthy health's cure to lead the body back from the daring attack, medical magicians conjuring their scientific techno miracles and schemas themes through the dreamy fog slow and clears loved ones dear appear. Can they push back the cause, clacking claws, and repair the desperate, dangerous, laring snare, dreaming that they might vanquish and aid, they might match and catch my life's crusade? We're flying on faulty, flapping wings, flight and sing a better song yet again strong. Somehow can they conjure and anchor, repair, and earn my heartfelt thanks for their care? Recording these miles of bleats and beeps, pulses and cables bud and track, the blood's buzz deluxe, blood somehow, careful steps kept always at bay. What did he say? What was the tiniest misunderstanding demands? Danger dared repeat the seat. My mind slowly awake. No feeling there, smooth white ceiling sheer, no grip, eyes unblurring whirl, ping, 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 bing, vertiginous twirls, swinging sing. The gleaming portable machines record the laugh of life's bird shaking loose, the trail of feathered facts relax, past the hacks, the unburdened turn of repaired heart restart.
Oh, I just love it. There's such a music there, a ambience that you create, with your words, It's just
Thank you. Thank
honestly,
you.
you want to read it. You want to read it and you want to savor the
I'll
way
send you
you
a copy.
strung the words together.
I'll send you a copy.
Exactly. That was my request.
There's one
Yeah.
other that I want to share with you because
Okay.
philosophy and religion and culture is so much part of what the universe that you work in. Uh, as
Yeah.
a physician, you help people deal with the tragedies and the joys of life, and that's an absolutely marvelous thing. Um, when
Yeah.
I was working as a organizer to oppose George Bush's wars, two casual wars,
Yeah.
um, I worked with building a coalition. The Jewish folks against the war, the Arab folks against the war, the Quaker folks against the war, Catholics against the war. So all these different anti-war groups came together, and things went very well. Generally, they went very well. We were able to work together, have meetings that went smoothly, but often, too often, our Jewish peace activists and our Palestinian peace activists, often there was friction. And it became such a regular thing that I decided to do something daring. I invited the Palestinian activists and the Jewish activists to come together and have one meeting just about their issues because it was muddying up the water of this larger group trying to talk and organize for peace. Friends said to me, "Oh my God, you're inviting the Jewish folks and the Arab folks to one meeting? What are you, crazy?" And I said, I understand that we're not going to solve the problems, goodness knows, but maybe we can find a path where we can walk together. So I asked the people, I said, just do me one favor. I'm going to ask you to sign an agreement that you'll listen twice as much as talk, and number two, you'll give the respect that you want. So of the Jewish activists and the Palestinian activists, I had many people agree and sign and come to a meeting. So this meeting went very well. I was ecstatic. Everybody got along. They were kind to each other. They listened. I was on cloud nine. I thought somehow I had managed to help people come together, right? I'm feeling really good. So as I'm walking away, after the meeting was over, a young gentleman, a Palestinian, came over to me and he said, "Wow, man, that went really well." And I said, I thought so too. I'm just so happy. And he said, "So you must obviously be a Jew." And I thought, if that's his takeaway, oh my God. So I wrote this. It's called "I Thought You Were a Jew."
Yeah.
I'm a Jew. I'm a Buddhist. I'm a pagan. And what's truest, I'm a Christian and an animist, sometimes a philatelist, a Tibetan and a Hindu, and no matter what you do, I think I like what you do. God, I think she's very open minded. I'm reminded when St. John's at the stake, I'm calling Blake. When Luther calls, I'm an Eskimo too. I think that's the least I can do. To wear a ghost shirt to my baptism when Martin causes a schism. I'm a Muslim and a Druid. My position's rather fluid. I'm a Sikh and a Taoist. Of that I think I'm proudest. I'm a capitalist and a pinko. At least sometimes I think so. Sometimes I'm agnostic, a Rastafarian Coptic, a Methodist contrarian, or even a librarian with a sectarian Siberian who often turns to Mecca when counting on Kabbalah to get him to Shambhala. A Catholic Baptist evangelist, a Dunker agrarian fundamentalist, a 7-day adventurist, a Scientologist apologist, juggling snakes with the Lady of the Lakes, and when praying aloud at Delphi, a Mithraic tantric yogi, a Jasmine playing boogie. A close insight to God, at least that's what we thought. A Confucian and a Shinto, it seems that's what I'm into. A Calvinist and a Navajo with a nodding wink to Xanadu. A Cherokee, a Schwabian, Swinburgian, Rostron, Hussite, a Theosophist and a Thelemite, spilling celestial, spiritual dynamite.
Yeah. Honestly, the way you bring all these words together to express so much, it's absolutely fascinating. Absolutely
Thank you. Thank
fascinating.
you. So please,
Very
let's hear some
interesting.
more from the great Dr. Deena.
Okay. So, right. The next one is called plasticine. Now, one of the things that has happened, especially to the Hindus, I was born a Hindu, so it gels with your poem about the various religious faiths uh, by coincidence. It's called plasticine. So, what's happened in South Africa is that a great many Hindus were born Hindus, come from generations of Hindus, but the religion is very disorganized. And in the old days, people used to say prayers only in Latin, and I think the Catholics still do to an extent. And so then there was a breakaway, and people asked for prayers in the native tongue and that sort of thing. So we still have that sort of thing. So we have uh, prayers in the temples, which we don't understand. So it obviously drives people away, and it drives them to a church or a mosque where, there are people who will work with them or teach them things. And I find the key is that they are supported in the Islamic religion and the Christian religion, whatever the denomination. But with the Hindus, they seem to spend a lot of time fighting each other and arguing about nothing, I think. And at the end of it, they just fall apart. They disintegrate. So I believe in South Africa, Hinduism is a dying faith because somehow they can't work together. And the essence of civilization is people must know how to work together. So this poem is called Plasticine. I dishonored you. I raised the kungum from your forehead. I ripped the thali from your neck. I stripped you of your sari. I broke your back. I humiliated you. I changed your name to mine. I occupied your mind. I ravaged you. I stole your home, your land, your culture, your wealth, your language, your heart. I own you, and you don't even know it. You smile serenely at me, trying desperately to be like me. You go your way, respecting, honoring, loving me, totally blissfully unaware of that which I have perpetrated. Kungam is the mark of a married lady according to Hindu custom, and Thali is a South Indian Hindu religious symbol worn by women to distinguish their marriage status. Okay, so this poem is just a few lines, but it's close to my heart. It's called um, Men may rant and rave, torture and slaughter, burn and pillage, but in the end, it is the wise ladies who give birth to the future. Then this one was written when war, the invasion of Ukraine happened in February 2022. Imagine a world, a tribute for the people of the Ukraine and Russia. Imagine a world where the warriors are infused with wisdom. Imagine a world where sagacious soldiers in their hundreds of thousands refuse to be invaders, ravagers, thieves, and murderers. A world where the patriots refuse to put their precious lives on the line for psychopaths. Imagine such a world. Imagine a world where the children are cherished, where the ladies are celebrated, where the men are worthy of love, where the elderly are revered, adored, and respected. Imagine a world. Imagine a world where greed is seen to be as disgusting as war. Imagine a world where racism is seen as the purgatory of the retarded. Imagine a world. Imagine a world where the ashamed bigots realize that they reek with the stench of the irrational. Imagine a world where arrogance is the arena of the absurd. Imagine a world. Imagine a world where all are able to see the divine in diverse cultures and eclectic music plays a symphony of love in our spirits. Imagine a world where the fiends are subjected to justice. Imagine a world where the traitors are ashamed and the sweetness of the soul is savored. Imagine a world where the dreams of Gandhi, King, and Mandela are not dreams. Imagine such a world.
Beautiful, brother. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. The next one is a poem for my daughter. So it's called Foseshni. The poorest people are not the poor. The poorest people are those who are poor inside. The people who are really poor are those who will not care for anything, who will waste water, food, electricity, and so much else. The poorest people are those who abuse those who love them. The poorest people are those who violate their environment, their fellow citizens, their country. The poorest people are those who do not care for themselves and their families. The poorest people are those who lack self-respect and do not respect other people and other people's things. The poorest people are those who have a poverty of the mind, a poverty of the spirit, a poverty of the soul. Thank you.
Bravo. Couldn't agree more, sir. Couldn't agree more.
Thanks. Okay. Then let's take one from here.
Sure.
Mm. West and East. From the west comes the night, from the east comes the day. From the west comes the darkness, from the east comes the light. From the west comes the cold, from the east comes the warmth. From the west come the colorless people, from the east come the people with the rich hue. That upsets some people, but I
Well,
thought I
that's
should.
okay. That's completely okay.
And
You
then,
know,
um, yeah,
let me share one
Karen.
more with you because it's so like that poem you just read,
Okay,
Imagine a World. This is my
okay,
version of that same thought. So in
yeah,
my metaphor is okay, you'll see. It's called non-disposable world. Picture it.
right,
A world without thermonuclear overkill. Bomb lost its thrill? It will. It will. Picture it. A world without when all the bombs are gone. Too far, Mon? Bomb lost its thrill? It will. It will. Picture it. A world not holding its breath at the edge of death. the toxic waste, the chemical taste of food, in money only good. Bomb lost its thrill? It will. It will. Picture it. No mad generals with pointing digit poised, ears pinned, filled with noise of shouts of doubts. Bomb lost its thrill? It will. It will. Picture it. A world after the end of biological weapons that fools would send, threaten. Bomb lost its thrill? It will. It will. Picture it. No fanatic, dramatic, climactic climate war. No inversions or floods or earthquake cone crunch. Too much heat then or dry. No clouds in the sky. No rain with lunch. Bomb lost its thrill? It will. It will. Picture it. No ray guns in space. No thistly, whistly missiles to bless the stratosphere torn or hotheads wind down, burn after space war. Rafter thought it had meant quite a lot. Bomb lost its thrill? It will. It will. Picture it. The bomb's gone. The missiles dismissal. The sub decommissioned. No reactors out fishing. Picture it. The control board's turned off. Did I hear a scoff? Bomb lost its thrill. It will. It will.
A bomb should never have a thrill. Should give nobody a thrill, and yet it does. Okay,
Yes.
my poem goes like this. It was originally published in March 2020. It appears to be appropriate to recall it now at this time of global sorrow because of the passing of Alexei Navalny while he was incarcerated by the Putin regime. It is dedicated to those who resisted apartheid, including Steve Biko, Dr. Gunum, Dr. Neil Aggett, Professor Dennis Brutus, Ismail and Fatima Mir, attorney Sir Cyril Ramaphosa, who's South Africa's current president. Homo sapiens. I'm trying to think. Yeah. Homo sapiens, human beings, delicate, puny, vulnerable. Their flesh, blood, bones, and nerves, eyes, ears, nails, and hearts are so easily tortured. They're also they're also fragile and yet so valorous. Every millimeter of their skin is suffused with pain by the tormentors, and yet they are so incredibly heroic, it brings tears to my eyes. The way in which over millennia so many have resisted humiliation and derision, tyranny and oppression is absolutely incredible. The divine seems to emanate from their eyes, and the heartbeat of the universe appears to pulsate in their arteries. Um, I want to live, this is the next one, but I can't stop thinking. I want to live, but I can't stop reading. I want to live, but I can't stop writing. In a world of savages, reading, thinking, and writing may be lethal interests.
Beautiful.
Right. And then, yeah, this one is a bit of a difficult poem, which some people might not like. It's called Freedom. The armies of the warring continent that shackled us emerged from the trenches of despair and slaughtered each other. The pain, the terror, the destruction, and the horror that they had unleashed on our planet, they erupted now upon each other, like mindless puppets on invisible chains. They obeyed their masters and marched straight into hell, and they helped liberate us by their deaths. Okay, this one is called the New Apartheid. Um, it's very strange and ironic and sad. But when we got the vote in 1994, we also got about 9 months later a letter from the local municipality at Belito, which is opposite where we lived, which is like the white area. And then there's an Indian area where we lived. Nobody was not white, nobody was European actually lived there. It was just an Indian area, Indians and Africans living together. So they said they wanted to take our land for 10,000 rand, which is peanuts, an acre. So we thought this was very bizarre because we thought apartheid had gone. So we get this letter in 1995, actually, and then my father phones me and tells me this is what they want to do to us. And so we decided to, write to the authorities and say, obviously the local municipality was behaving in an apartheid way. So we needed to write to the senior people. And I got the address, would you believe it, of Nelson Mandela. And I wrote to the Public Protector, the Human Rights Commission, and to Nelson Mandela. And his lieutenant was a man called Ahmed Kathrada, and he wrote back to me. And he said, what the ANC is doing there, the local ANC, is what they are responsible for, and we cannot interfere from central government, which was obviously ridiculous. And then what happened was we started getting targeted as a family, as a community. And I, because I had written all those letters, got it more than anybody else. And, before that had happened in 1993, I'd been attacked and stabbed after my book of short stories had been published. So I was already like known to the fascist authorities. And what we didn't know was that the fascists and the new elite, the ANC elite, were getting together in order to enrich themselves. So what they wanted was mainly Africans to come and live in low-cost housing around our school because they wanted the Africans to go to our school, the R.A. Padayachee school, and not go to the schools which used to be for Europeans only. So they built low-cost housing for the working class around our school, expropriated the land, destroyed an Indian community, small community, maybe about 12 families, on living on 1 acre, 2 acres, 3 acres, 4 acres, 5 acres, that kind of thing. And they had, well, what happened was a whole lot of people who didn't have homes had built shacks, on they occupied the land. They invaded the land, occupied the land, and they were living there. So obviously they needed housing. But instead of expropriating land from Europeans who had like 1,000 acres or 500 acres, they're going to expropriate the people who'd been oppressed by apartheid for generations. So that's what I wrote. I wrote that to the newspapers. I wrote that to Mandela. I wrote that to everybody, that you do not punish the people who've suffered a great deal and managed to achieve something, build a sawmill, build a school, do something, in that area where we didn't even have proper roads, and we didn't have proper water. We want development, but not at the expense of the people who had been deprived of the vote for decades. I actually through the response of the authorities was what happened next. Our home burned down in a mysterious fire in Amshlali on the 2nd of May, 1995. And when we continued the opposition on the 19th of July, 1996, a mob consisting basically of poor people who had, lived in informal housing and who saw us as obstructing their way to proper homes, invaded our land, burnt our sawmill, looted it first, and wiped us out, basically. So we lost our home and we lost our sawmill. And so anyway, after all that, I wrote The New Apartheid. They show no sense of shame about their awful behavior. It reminds me of those. Sorry, it disappeared from my screen. They show no sense of shame about their awful behavior. It reminds me of those who loved apartheid and benefited it. They had no sense of shame either. Cry, the beloved country. We wanted more justice, and now often we get less. We voted for better health care, better housing, and better education, but now things are worse in many respects. We voted for more light, and now we get less. We voted for less crime, and now we get more. We voted for less racism, and we still experience racism. The cauldron of terror grows, and those who eat people pick their teeth with our bones. I pray for South Africa, and God help us all.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry that you've had to go through all that.
Yeah, I thought it's best to, include it in this recital because it's obviously not well known either in South Africa
No,
or
not at
in the
all.
world. And you know, um, I think before I depart this planet, I should, let people know that this is what has happened. And it's happening not just to our family or to our community, it's happening all over the country. And, we need to let people know about it and hopefully try to get it to stop.
Yes, we have a whole new set of troubles here as well, and it seems that uh, power has been taken over by some very evil, racist people, and it is the hope of myself and so many others who care about humanity that we can somehow turn this around and throw out these thieves and criminals and racists. Uh,
Yeah,
we will not sit idly by while the Constitution is destroyed. And the struggle for humanity, the struggle for individual liberty continues. Uh, Things that we thought were solved, the
yes,
Magna Carta, where the king was forced to live under the same law that he promulgated, these people want to remove it, and it's terrible. And the
yeah,
rich do not own the world. The world is ours.
yes,
Oh,
yes.
brother, thank you so much. Do you want to end on? You want to have one final piece?
Yeah, I want to end with one final poem about health. And it's called Working at a South African Public Health Facility. I
Wow.
mused, how can it make me happy if I'm rude or rough with you? How can it make me happy if I make your life difficult? Would it make my digestion or my self-image? Would it help my digestion or my self-image if I shout at you, if I'm curt? Would it make me feel superior or better than you? Would it make my daughter Seshni smile or make my son Segran proud? Would it make the melanin in my skin disappear? If I'm arrogant and horrible and cold and unfeeling, if I bully people, what does that say about my soul? What does it matter if I have a string of university degrees, prizes, and diplomas? If I've studied Gannon, Grant, Hart, Duss, and Harrison, read Einstein, Gandhi, Orwell, Biko, and Mandela, if I still make children cry and women weep, and make the old shake their heads in sadness. When you are in pain and tears trickle from your eyes like blood from your soul, what kind of person would be simple-mindedly obsessed with himself? I see patients who have kissed and sung and danced and loved. I see people who love and need love. So I say again, why must I upset myself by being awful to you? It's so much easier to smile, to be polite, to be kind, and to care. From you comes courtesy, humanity, appreciation, and respect. You illuminate my one life. When I look at you, I see South Africa, my beloved country. When I hear you, I serve my country and I serve God. I should have prefaced this poem by explaining why I wrote it. From childhood, I've seen healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, all kinds of people behaving very badly with sick people. And it's something that's perplexed me from childhood. I couldn't understand why a healthcare worker would start screaming at a patient, would start abusing the patient, would start violating the patient. Why? Why should we do this? It doesn't make any sense. We're trained people to care. We're trained for all our years of education to be compassionate, to be kind, to heal, to take away people's pain. We're not supposed to cause them more pain, and yet in virtually every hospital I've worked, in virtually every community clinic or wherever, I've seen people. being abused by healthcare workers. This is in the public service. It is rare in the private service. But in the public service, somehow healthcare workers feel they can do what they want to the poor people because these poor people are not either paying very little or paying nothing at all. And a lot of these sick people can't actually fight back. A lot of the people are old, frail, trying desperately to live, and then they get, they get savaged actually by healthcare workers. So I thought I would write this as an ode, to the people of our country, that we should try to be a little bit more civilized because, right through apartheid, we said we're not going to behave like the people who imposed apartheid and benefited from apartheid. But unfortunately, a lot of people, what I call melanin enriched people, melanin blessed people, behave worse than any melanin deficient people. And a lot of people get very angry with me for saying that, but it is the truth. And we cannot move towards a repair of the problem, a healing, unless we acknowledge the problem and then deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, my brother. So much an honor to hear you, to learn about you. You're sharing so much of your history and some of your beautiful poetry. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I hope you have a wonderful
Thanks.
evening, sir.
You too. Thank you so much for the rest of your day.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so
sir.
much.
Have a wonderful day, and I'm so honored that you would join me. Thank you. Bye bye. Namaste.
Thank you. All the best, Richard. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
See you soon.